Now, we've been talking about this horrible, disastrous, really, occurrence surrounding the Opal Tower at Olympic Park, with hundreds of residents literally scared and angry and, of course, forced out of that tower because of cracking concrete and engineering concerns. Then they were allowed back in fact, encouraged to go back in. Then they were sent out yet again, and we don't know exactly when they're going to be allowed back into that building, when all the engineering checks will be complete and what the future holds for them. Some of them, apparently, who had been put up at the nearby Pullman Hotel have had to move out of that because it's booked up for New Year's Eve celebrations. So you've got to have your heart out and feel a bit of sympathy for the residents in this case. But there's a lot of dispute now, a lot of debate, a lot of discussion about the procedures that are involved in building and engineering approvals and certifications. And I want to bring in a lawyer who's specialised in some of this dispute resolution in the past. His name is Chris Kerin. He's with Kerin Benson Lawyers, who practice across the state and in the ACT. Thanks for joining us, Chris.
No problem.
Tell me, are we seeing more and more of these sorts of disputes about structural integrity in buildings?
Structural integrity is typically not an issue that comes up a lot. Water ingress and fire and life safety issues tend to be more frequent. So in that regard, this one's a little bit unusual. Typically in Australia, structural issues and electricity, things that can kill people, tend to be done reasonably well. So normally it's water ingress, but this is just pretty much symptomatic of a problem that's been around for quite some time.
Well, tell me what that problem is. What is it symptomatic of?
It's symptomatic of a problem. Well, let me put it this way. The City Futures Centre at New South Wales Uni did a study about 6 years ago. They interviewed many owners' corporations. They reported that 85% of new buildings suffered from some form of building defects. So the reality is newer buildings are more likely than not to have building defects.
Just worth going over that again. A study found that 85% of new buildings had building defects.
Correct.
That's astonishing, isn't it, in a first world country like this where we have planning approvals at state and local government level and all the rest of it, certification procedures from engineers and everything?
It's a figure that surprises people who aren't familiar with the area. I suppose one of the problems is that no one wants to talk down their building because of the property price issue. Obviously, property prices will go down if you start publicising the problems you have with your building. So it's kind of a secret thing, but it is endemic.
So you get involved in a lot of these cases. You mentioned water ingress being a major issue. Is that usually something that goes wrong during construction, that something hasn't been worked out efficiently, or is water become an issue subsequently?
Look, water ingress typically involves balconies or wet areas, particularly bathrooms. And look, its causes could be a range of things. Using waterproofing products that aren't suitable. So there's a lot of new products out on the market. They all come with particular specifications as to when and how they should be used. Builders aren't great at reading fine print, so on many occasions they'll be using these products in ways they weren't intended. Or it could just be general poor building quality in terms of not following the Australian standards. There's a whole range of ways in which water can ingress a building.
Well, when you're dealing with these issues and you say that you're not surprised by the percentage of buildings that have these problems arise, is it because the building standards are not up to scratch? Is it because people are skipping over them? Is it because the inspections aren't thorough enough? Or is it because simply we're picking up little things, little problems that need to be resolved with the help of legal intervention?
There's probably a range of reasons for the situation we find ourselves in. Firstly, buildings 30, 40 years ago were quite simple. You were dealing with 2-3-story walk-ups, bit of car parking out the back or front, sloping roofs, pretty simple kind of build. Many of the buildings now are much larger. They involve flat roofs or gardens on roofs or pools on roofs, underground car parks, complicated mechanical equipment like lifts or mechanical ventilation. So these buildings are a lot more complicated to build and yet, the builders are still the same sort of builders trying to do these jobs. Secondly, you probably had the demise of someone called a clerk of works, who used to be this angry old man who'd been in the industry for decades, and he would be this quality control guy within these building companies. He's been replaced by sort of shinier people who are tertiary educated, who are kind of more focused on cost, project managers. So the demise of clerks of works is probably a factor. Another factor is probably the private certification scheme that's been around for a while now.
Where you shop around for your own certifier?
Yeah, basically you have a kind of commercial conflict between the person who's certifying the work being dependent upon the person whose work is being certified for money. So basically,
for money and more work, presumably. You want to keep the relationship going because there's a financial interest at stake.
Correct.
Sounds like a problem. So what you're describing there is a focus on costs rather than building integrity, probably timing as well. Obviously, time is money, especially in the building game, so they're trying to hurry things up and keep costs down. And also this issue of the private certification, which we've heard some discussion about and which I think governments are going to have to look at and reform around the country now because of that obvious conflict you mentioned.
Yeah, look, I mean, you have to remember also, as I said, this thing comes in out of the news cycle pretty regularly. The Grenfell Tower fire was June 2017, so 18 months ago. The La Crosse fire was 4 years ago. And so a year ago, the news media was focused on combustible cladding, legislative reform in that regard. So it's never far from the surface. I mean, in Victoria 6 years ago, we found out via a couple of reports that, hundreds or thousands of building licensees were doing work having not actually passed the exam or having had a friend pass the exam or not sitting the exam at all.
We've got to be more vigilant on standards then. As you say, it comes up again in the news cycle because of events, because of fires in some cases, and now because of this horrible situation with what is a significant structural problem at Opal Tower. Tell me about the legal complications of dealing with this, Chris Kerin, because you've got hundreds of tenants there. Some of those arrangements, of course, will differ. There might be strata titles or people owning properties or leasing properties. What are their rights like when it comes to something as basic as the structural integrity of the building?
The new building bond regime came in on the 1st of January 2018. They're not covered by that because this building was done before that regime was in place. So they'll have to rely on statutory warranties under the Home Building Act. The issue there will be, assuming there have been breaches of statutory warranties, does the builder have any money? Does the developer have any money? They're kind of the key questions that a lawyer would be looking at. This
could get very ugly and end up in courts for years to come, couldn't it?
It's quite possible, yeah.
And if I'm say I've bought the penthouse there, but let's say I'm not quite that wealthy. I've got the second from top floor there, and after they do all these engineering studies and they give the building the all clear, they fix up the cracked cement. They say it's all clear, you can move back in. What if I say, actually, no, after all of this, I'm very uncomfortable about this building. I don't really want to live there anymore. Would they have the right to get their money back, to get out of it that easy, or are they kind of stuck with it if the engineers now say it's okay?
Well, it becomes a battle of engineers, effectively, or a battle of experts. An owner may get their own engineer's opinion on what's happened and whether the work done was adequate or not. Then it becomes a question of my expert versus your expert. Which one will the court accept? That's the situation that you'll find yourself in there.
Thanks very much for filling us in on some of that background, Chris. I really appreciate it. That's Chris Kerin there from Kerin Benson Lawyers, who deal with these sorts of disputes all the time. Let me know what you think about this. 131873 is the number. I reckon if I had an apartment in that building, I would feel very uncomfortable about moving back in. If for no other reason, even if you think it's absolutely safe, think about what your resale options are going to be after this controversy. Let me know what you think.